Coming up, nobody likes job hunting, especially right now. But if you're looking to start the next chapter in your professional life, stay tuned. We're mastering Job Search 22 with a special higher learning edition of B Squared. And it all starts right now.
You gotta be cruel to be kind in the right measure. You gotta be cruel to be kind.
Greetings and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Brandon Bridges, and this is a special edition of B Squared. So the hot topic right now is the economy, and with it the state of the talent search. Now if you're like me, and who is, you've job hunted at least once in your life. Also, if you're like me, you probably enjoy it about as much as you enjoy going to the dentist. But then again, if you do enjoy going to the dentist, well, who are we to judge? Our guests tonight include recruiters, resume writers, the list goes on. And between us, we've got expertise on every aspect of the job hunt, from getting noticed to getting hired. Folks, if you would, introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your backgrounds. I nominate Marla to go first.
I knew you were going to do that. I'm Marla. I'm a project manager for a DoD contracting company. I have been with this company for 15 years, kind of moved up through the channels. I'm now one of the leads at the company. We do a lot of hiring, and I'm always looking and love to talk with other folks about good ideas to help get great people and keep great people.
And if you want to talk good ideas, you are in the right place, because we have people that I'm sure have a lot of good ideas to bring to the table. Scott, how about you?
Hi, I'm Scott. I am a resume writer and career coach. Been doing this for approaching 7 years, and at the risk of giving away my age, before this I was a recruiter for almost 20 years. So happy to be here today. Thank you.
Scott, you're in good company. I've been a multimedia developer for 22 years, so we are right there together. Jacqueline, how about you?
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Martinez. I have been in the HR recruiting world, building companies really for 12 years. And right now I am the head of HR and talent at a technology company based out of California. And I also lead a podcast on personal transformation. I'm also a career coach as well. So I hit all the aspects of what it takes to not only hire, but also to support job seekers as well.
Nice. And that means you could probably have some unique insights on the Great Resignation and its impact.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right. Eric, how about you?
Hey Brandon, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Eric Quintas. I'm actually an engineer. That's my full-time job, but I do career coaching on the side. I've been helping people find jobs for maybe going on 5 years now. And it was recently that I decided to make it a more formal thing. It was usually word of mouth, people referring people to me, until I decided, hey, let's make a bigger impact. So here I am.
And we're very glad to have you. And we're very glad to have all four of you with us. So thank you all very much for joining us tonight. This is going to be a show among shows. And you know I felt that because I wore a tie. So if you followed me on LinkedIn for any amount of time, you've probably heard me talk about that infamous stretch in 2014 when I was job hunting for 227 days straight. For anyone keeping score, that's about 7.5 months, and let me tell you, that was not a pleasant experience. During that time, I filed over 1,100 job applications. That averages out to about 5 a day every day. And each time, I did exactly what a good job seeker is supposed to do. I filled out every question the ATSs were asking. I provided references up front. I manually retyped my resume into Taleo, Brass Ring, Workday, you name it. Job seeking was practically a full-time job in itself. So what happened? Of the applications I submitted, more than 900 just outright ghosted me, which I define as no update for 30 days or more after I applied. Almost 200 did nothing but send automated rejection emails. 14 job openings were canceled, which is nobody's fault, it just happens. And there are another 4 that I declined to pursue once I learned more about the company or the role. 4. You heard that right. 4 led to interviews. Of those, I got 2 offers. One for a temp job that didn't last, and one that was actually pretty good, but that I had to move out of state to accept. So when it's all said and done, for all that effort and for being a good job seeker, 98% of the time, I was treated pretty poorly by prospective employers. Was I doing it right? Maybe, maybe not. What we're here for tonight is to try to help make it easier on anyone who's out there job hunting than it was for me. So, with that being said, let's dive into the first part of the job seeking experience, which is resume tips. Now, everybody thinks that they have the best resume in the world, and they probably do. It all comes down to a question of formatting. So, what I was taught was that when I'm putting together a resume, I need to list my name, address, phone number, email address, which shouldn't be like tnpir4002@gmail.com, which is my email address, and I need to list every job that I've had for the last 15 years, say. I need to give an exhaustive list of what I did, an exhaustive list of what my accomplishments were, basically try to cover all bases so that a prospective recruiter who's doing a keyword search might pick up on something. That's what I was taught to do, but 227 days of job searching with that paradigm tells me maybe I wasn't doing something quite right on the resume front. So, Scott, you're our expert on resumes, so talk to us about what makes a good resume.
Well, I think what you said are all tips that make it a good resume. I don't think there's any question about that. Look, there's formatting, and then there's what's actually going to make a difference. And, yes, I mean, everybody's resume should be, particularly in the U.S. market, different markets are different, but in the U.S. market, your resume should be very accomplishments driven. The reason being that you want to have a lot of bullet points that have achievements so that the recruiter and the employer can visualize, okay, that this individual is not just a doer, they're an achiever, and they can do similar things for us. Part of it is making sure that you're not doing wonky stuff with the resume, that you're keeping it in single column format so that it can easily scan. You've got dozens of applicant tracking systems out there that all read them differently. And the other thing is that making sure that your resume is going to be a reasonably decent match for the job that you're applying to. If you're applying for a job as a police person, a law enforcement officer, and your whole career has been a multimedia developer, and you don't have any experience being in law enforcement, you're probably not necessarily going to get that job unless you can demonstrate a transition in some skills. But it's all about painting a picture for an employer about what you can do for them. The last thing is that, there are so many people out there that just don't put time and effort into the resume. They may think they do, but they, haven't bothered to proofread. They haven't formatted it well. Microsoft Word is a difficult program to use. Most people don't come to terms with that. And being able to, I don't know how many people actually know how to use tabs on Microsoft Word, but following best practices on a nice, attractive resume that's not going to look like it was eaten by your dog, that's an important part of it.
Agreed. Jacqueline, you're probably the second person after the job seeker themselves to see a resume. So what would you add to that?
Thank you. Yeah, I see a lot of resumes. And this might be controversial coming from a recruiter, but I hate resumes. I just think that there's so many problems with the modern resume, right? And they kind of introduce somebody, they just start to, but a person is definitely more than a resume. There's a full story behind it. And so we do our best, right? And Microsoft Word, I don't even have access to Microsoft Word on my computer. I'm just saying. So my, resumes come in the form of little PDF attachments or Google, all the different ways. So when I look at resumes, I'm doing a lot of sourcing on LinkedIn. And so resumes get translated on LinkedIn. And I'm also looking at profiles. Now, not everybody who applies to the jobs that we have needs to have a LinkedIn profile, but the translation is there. And I want to see a good first impression, honestly. So it's like, yes, hi, my name is Brandon, and this is what I'm about in the first couple of lines. After that, the details don't really matter to me. In those first couple of lines, what do you do? Are we a general fit? I'm probably going to reach out and talk to you, and then we can have our conversation. But I'm not going to go through, line by line and critique. And if they say this on line 25, whoop, they're out. I try to look beyond the resume and see what story this resume or this person might tell me if we were to get on the phone. And I'm 100% of the time amazed at what I hear when I meet somebody. So it's really, really hard to use a resume, I think, as a sourcing tool. Unfortunately, it's how it's done. So I have a lot of conversations. I'm just going to put that out there.
That's a good breakdown of what a resume brings to you, Jacqueline. So thank you very much for that. So Marla, after the recruiter, you're probably the next person to see a resume. So what do you look for?
Thanks. Well, I actually have to agree with Jacqueline on the point of I love the paragraph at the beginning that gives them the little intro. That is true. You definitely can capture the essence of that person and what they're looking for, and what you're looking for. And then from there, I kind of look balance of what they told me and almost look to see if I find those bullets in their resume under some of those jobs. Like if they're working on projects or if they excelled on something, maybe it balances off of one of those bullet points that are in their resume. Another thing that I always have to look at, basically because I'm in contracting, is their education. And that's usually just because it is a requirement. And we've had times that resumes aren't always clear. They'll say sometimes I'm not quite sure if they're working on their degree or if they've actually received their degree. I've went through entire interviews because the wording was incorrect, and we found out were disqualified. And I spent their time and my time because of the way it was worded. So one of the first things I always have to do is I ask them right up front just to confirm, I see you graduated this year with this degree. Did you complete that degree? So I think that's very important to clear because I don't want to take up someone's time because certain jobs do require certain educations. And that's just, time that none of us want to go to waste. Kind of where I see it from there. And then I do a lot of calling. I like to follow up and meet with the people. And then from that point, I highlight certain things that I may question or I find interesting. So if I ask during our interview, I want to look for some soft skills, I could use some of their points. Like, tell me about this. What did you do at this job? In a certain aspect. Sometimes I'll use a resume to help the conversation in the interview process.
That's a good insight. All right, Eric, you've heard what the different people involved in the process are looking for and what they think. From the perspective of a career coach, what say you?
Yeah. So first off, I think, all the points that were discussed by Scott, Jackie, and Marla are spot on. In regards to the minimum qualifications, that's one thing that, we have to emphasize on for people who are applying for roles because they can throw their resume out anywhere, right? But if you don't meet the bare minimum, you're not going to get it. It's as simple as that. So Marla had, just hit the nail on the head on that one. With Jacqueline, what she mentioned, making, she's not going to be reading every single line. And that's true. You as a job seeker, you probably spend quite a bit of time preparing your resume, preparing the application. You spend about an hour of your time, right? The recruiter is going to look at it for seconds. And they're not going to have time to read between the lines. So you have to really understand the job description, the words that they are using, the language, because from my experience, I'm also an engineer in tech and software. And sometimes the software goes by different names. Sometimes the things that you do go by different names. And even though you're an expert at it, you call it by one name, but the recruiter has heard it from the hiring manager on name number 2. If you do not list out name number 2, even though they're the same thing, you're still not going to be seen because they think that's not what I was told. And it's not the recruiter's fault. It's just the name of the game, right? So you have to read the job description. You have to understand what they're looking for and tie it as much as you can. If you just have to switch a word, it's the same thing, then switch the word. You'll get you noticed. And the other thing is showing value. A lot of times people make a huge list of this. I've done this and I've done that. And honestly, it makes you look like you were just following orders. For your whole life, you were just following orders. But the moment you can see beyond the bare actions into what that action resulted in, right? For example, I improved the manufacturing line by 3 units a day. And at first you're thinking, oh, good for me, 3 units a day, right? But look at it long term. In a year, if those units are like $1,000, $2,000, you save a substantial amount, $250,000, right? And so you can put things as in, increase manufacturing line by a certain percentage, an equivalent of X amount of dollars a year, right? And it shows that you understand the value that you bring. You're paying your salary. You're a good investment. And I think from the places that I've seen, the people I look at, the people who understand the value that they bring, they are in a better position to negotiate, to talk, and you can treat them with just in a completely different light, right? Like it's like they're not asking for charity; they know what they bring. So
That's a good way to look at it. Other opinions on this?
Yeah, I mean, look, my bread and butter is resumes, and I make money doing resumes. But I'm going to tell you, I mean, there's a couple things here. First of all, the word resume in French means summary. It's not meant to be your life story. It's meant to be a bunch of bullet points that are explaining to somebody very quickly what you can do and why you should do it for them. But the resume is just a part of the package. It's one of those things that's kind of a necessary evil. I'm gonna, the job process really is terrible these days. The application process is bordering on evil. And it's one of those things that, it's been motivated by, I mean, take a look at how it's gotten here. I mean, and Jacqueline, I'm sorry if this hits home in a hard way, but, I mean, you get bored with resumes, and the reason being is because it's such an engine. And what happens is that, the average recruiter is going through thousands of resumes a day, right? And of those, they may have 30, 40 open jobs, each of which have 10,000 applicants. You've got 400,000 potential resumes to look for. You don't have time to do that. So what happens is that, to go touch on everything. I mean, Eric, you were talking about a certain word that a keyword matches. If it matches, great. It's going to get you higher in the filter. If it doesn't, it's going to put you lower in the filter. And if I'm a recruiter and I'm sitting here and I've got hiring managers breathing down my neck saying, I need people now. And, I'm working on job A, but job B's manager comes over. I'm going to go through his queue as quickly as possible. Start with the ones that are the highest percentage match. Go for the ones, until I got 5 or 10 resumes that I like. That's it. I'm going to stop at that point because, I fulfilled my, my obligation at that point. But the truth of the matter is, and Jacqueline, you hit on this too, LinkedIn is such a huge part of the search. If people don't have a LinkedIn profile or they're not actively nurturing that, they're missing out on a lot of jobs because, there's the perception of the passive candidate, the idea that somebody who's not applying to a job or looking for a job is more valuable. So, companies pay $15,000 a seat to go onto LinkedIn to find these people and to search through. And you know what? The smart candidates are the ones that tackle it from both angles. Yes, I've got, my profile out there and I see that out there and maybe I'm applying to jobs, but I'm hoping to get some people to come to look at me. Maybe I'm using LinkedIn to reach out to a hiring manager at a company at the same time. It's all part of the same package. And the people that just post and pray are losing out on opportunities. And Brandon, your experience is not unusual.
Scott, would you say I always hear some people saying that you shouldn't have it more than 2 pages, or some say it's 4, others say it doesn't matter. What is your take on the whole amount of pages of?
Yeah. So, the thing about resumes is there's no hard and fast rules. It's all rules of thumb, and I'm sure you've all seen, you ask 10 different people about the same resume, you're going to get 10 different opinions. I mean, the guidelines that I tend to follow is if you're a recent graduate or you've got less than 2 years of experience, 1 page should be sufficient. If you're a business professional, you should try to squeeze that into 2 pages. If you're an IT person or a techie or maybe even like a construction project manager, you've got more leeway because you got to get into some of the more, details of some of the projects and kind of getting into some of that. But the whole point is short is sweet. But I've also seen people who are of the same, the other opinion, which is, oh, well, it's got to go through the ATS. So you might as well have it so long that every keyword in the universe is going to show up there. And, that may get you through the initial screen, but I can tell you that when I looked at a resume as a recruiter and I saw 6 pages, 7 pages, the first thing that came through my mind is, yeah, it made it through the filter, but this person can't summarize to save their life. So, it's really kind of it's kind of a moving target. But there is a point to keeping things short. And the other thing is that on a resume, the approach that I like to tell people is show me, don't tell me. Don't tell me you're a good project manager. Show me by the scope of some of the projects you led and what some of the results are. By doing that, you should be able to get multiple layers below that the recruiter or the hiring manager can imply, and that will come out during the interview. Jacqueline, anything?
Yeah, you bring up a great point, Scott. I definitely think that resumes are the summary, right? And it's not the best candidate who gets picked or hired. It's the best first, because yes, the reality is that companies are trying to make this match as efficiently as possible, and it's not a perfect science yet. And that is a lot of the reason why the candidate experience falls by the wayside. And so I'm really thankful that I'm in a place where it's more boutique and there is more care around what the candidate experience is like. But when you have 1,000 applicants per opening, it's how are you going to make that match? Are you going to go through 1,000 people? In some cases, you have those resources, but in most cases, no. And whatever the internal process is for making those matches is how it happens. And sometimes, they have an ATS where they can make those keyword matches. And sometimes it's who applied first and were the best matches. And we move along. Unfortunately, that is the case a lot of times.
Yeah, I don't mean to harp.
If you 200 applicants have applied, and then you're just applying now, your odds may be further down the chain versus
could be, yeah, not always,
depending on the company.
Yeah, most of the time.
And in most cases, a recruiter is not going to spend their time going alphabetical or in the order received. It's going to be, hey, it's like going on Google, right? I'm going to put in, I want to find an Italian restaurant near me. The pages that, the results that come back, the first page, I'm going to look through that first page. Those are the highest ranked results. Same thing with these ATSs and whatever algorithms they're using, whatever filter you've got on the back end. I'm going to start with the resumes that are the 100% match and work my way down. So, yeah, and if you've got a wrong keyword and, the computer decides you're ugly, that's it. I mean, that's just, you're not going to necessarily get seen in that case.
Those are good insights all. And as much as I wish I could say I was surprised, Scott, to hear that my experience is typical, I'm not surprised. It's a story that I've heard quite a bit. And there's a company out there that shall remain nameless, but that I spent 15 years applying to and never got so much as a single callback. Just automated rejection emails. And eventually I decided, you know what? If that's the way they treat candidates who are absolutely qualified, like point for the job rec that they're listing, what would the employee experience be like? And I just gave up and focused my efforts elsewhere. And I've never really regretted it. So there you have it. So the discussion has focused a lot on the content for the jobs that you list, but let's talk about the other side of it, employment gaps. So Scott, lead us off on how you would recommend people address employment gaps.
On the resume or in an interview?
Both. Actually, start with the resume. We'll do the interviews and the job seeker behaviors.
Yeah, when it comes to the resume, I mean, I think first of all, if you're more than a couple of years out of school, you don't need to list months. Just go years. In most cases, that's going to close a gap on the resume, and people can dig further into that. If it's something that spans multiple years, my personal opinion is if it's something that could take you down out of the candidacy, because people will question you. They'll start to think, well, gee, this person can't hold a job. Then own what the situation is. If you were a full-time caregiver, I'm dealing with a candidate like a client like that right now. If, someone who was a full-time caregiver, they had a premature child, they had a parent that was ill and in hospice, so they had to take 6 years out of the workforce. And that's exactly what I'm going to say. Full-time family caregiver. If people want to dig into the personal opinions on that, they can get in further. But own it.
That's good advice. Jacqueline, how about you?
Yeah, I completely agree, Scott. I have had candidates or, those seeking employment ask me before, should I put this on my resume? Should I lie, or fib or extend things or omit things? And I just think honesty is always the best policy. Build your resume with integrity, build your profile with integrity, and it'll shine through in all of your conversations, interview or not. And no matter what it is, own it. And there's always a story to tell, though. So be mindful of that story. What did you learn while you were a caregiver? How did you spend your extra time? How did you, care for the person you were supporting or yourself? What are some things that really changed how you operate as a potential team member to a team? And own the story.
That's good advice. Marla, what would you say by the time a resume gets to you?
I just have to, I don't discount the resume, but especially if they're qualified, just kind of like they say, if they come into an interview, I'm going to ask with a question. I see there's a gap in your resume. Like I said, I kind of mark things that I might see and I have questions or want to discuss. So I would just ask them those questions. I see there's a gap in your resume. What was that for? And let them give it right back to them to either help themselves or not.
I love the way that you phrase that. Eric, how about you?
Yeah, with the resume, I always, like Jacqueline said, honesty is the best policy. Just leave it there. If that gap is really affecting you, find another way to get noticed, right? Like through LinkedIn profile, through networking. The point is, once you get to the interview, that's where you can shine. And I love the way Marla said it. You can help yourself or not, and that's where I coach people and I help them see that there were learnings, there were things that actually helped you, right? You weren't just stagnant and in cryo sleep during this gap. And I see a lot of people take it very negatively, and that affects the mood of the interview, right? If you go in and people are like, well, I was laid off and nobody wanted to hire me, and it was really tough. I had self-esteem issues and family, and it just all of a sudden the mood of the interview goes down, right? And then you make the interviewer feel bad, and then nobody wants to feel bad, and all of a sudden you're not in a good spot. But but if you change it, right? Like even if you learn to play an instrument and you're like, yeah, I got laid off during that time, I learned to play the piano, something that everybody told me I was too old to do. I learned what my limits were and who I really am. I took time to explore different fields, an exploration that led me right here to this company and to this job, right? All of a sudden, the mood is completely different. And it's because you took control, right? Like whatever question is being asked, ultimately it's your mindset, the way you see yourself, your value, the things you learn that win you somebody's approval. And to me, it's about the feel, right? Like somebody sees that and they're like, man, they took a gap, something that most people see as negative, and you turn it into something positive. And I would like to have somebody like that on my team. So,
and Eric, that is a brilliant comment. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but from the times that I've interviewed people for jobs, their general mood and attitude when they're talking to you, that's the thing that, at least with me, that's what lingers with me after the interview. I mean, there was a time that I interviewed a couple of people for a graphic artist role, and one jumped out at me as, all right, this person is they have the technical know-how, but they're willing to learn, and they don't seem like someone who would back down from a challenge. And that is what stayed with me for the entire rest of that process. And that is hardly the only example, but you're exactly right. And I wrote down on my behaviors notes, connect with recruiter. So when we get to that point, I want to talk about good ways for job seekers to connect with recruiters and hiring managers. So since we've been talking about ATSs, the question that I know everybody out there is wanting me to ask is one that I know at least two people on this panel are going to be shaking their heads sadly at, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I know people are going to want me to ask it. How do we beat the ATS? And I'm throwing this one open for the floor.
So I can jump in. You're right. That's a tricky question. Personally, I try to, be what I would expect from an employer. And personally, I'm not a fan of the ATS or using it as a strong sourcing tool. And so the organization method that I use for candidates is layered on top of LinkedIn, and it just behaves differently. But when it comes to the ATS itself, hopefully every company uses something to organize. And there are some things that you can do on the front end to be strategic. And I know, I'm sure Scott and Eric shared this with their people that they're supporting, but, making sure that you're submitting resumes in a good format that will be parsed well, and just basically speaking the language of your industry and of your job expertise. But above and beyond that, I think, is how people should think. So how can they deliver this job application with excellence? Putting in your resume is one thing, and making a human connection is another thing. So people get jobs through people. One, connecting with the connectors. So talking your way in through any kind of method, whether that's LinkedIn networking, real life networking, phone networking, texting your friend that you haven't texted back in a long time, connecting through connectors. And then the second thing is reaching out to the recruiter directly if you're on LinkedIn. And almost every recruiter is on LinkedIn. I don't actually think I know of one who's not. Please tell me if they're not, and that's totally fine. It's their fault. But a lot of times the recruiter will put their face on the job post for that reason. And I love when job seekers reach out to me. And sometimes they use the standard template that LinkedIn suggests to reach out. And sometimes they get really creative. And especially I hire a lot of creative individuals, and I love when they get creative with their approach. And so I just take all those, conversations at face value and respond to as many as I can. A lot come through. But I think more job seekers think that more people are reaching out than actually do. And I get a lot of messages, but I don't get nearly as many messages as I get applications. So that's definitely make the connection is, I think, the best way to beat the ATS.
That's a good insight. Other thoughts?
I'll share a thought here. You can't beat the system. Bad systems beat good people. They just do. And, applicant tracking systems, they went into it with the best of intentions, right? Here were employers trying to make recruiters more productive. They're giving them this platform, giving them this tool, and, helping them to organize their day and giving them the analytics and everything. And there's a lot of benefits to a company to that. But, the truth of the matter is, and Jacqueline said this, social engineering is really the key here. And, what I typically recommend is, if you want to game the system, there are ways to do it. Like, for example, I had one client who would take the job description, paste it onto the end of the resume, make it a white font, and change it to 1 point. So what it did was it would go ahead and it would read and compare the jobs, and it's like, oh, good, this person's a perfect match. And the recruiter would read it like, what the hell is going on here? But it would make it through the filters. And I don't recommend that approach. Proceed at your own caution. I think that falls under the honesty category. But, there are ways to game that. But, the other part of this is you don't know. A lot of these ATSs allow recruiters to build filters behind the scenes. So even if the job description doesn't say that you've got to use AutoCAD, you can make a filter looking for everybody that applied to that job that has AutoCAD. And you may never see the people that have the top ranked results otherwise. So what I typically recommend to people is step one, take a few minutes, tweak the first third of the first page of the resume. The header, the brag piece, who am I, so that it's a little bit of a closer match to the job that you're applying to. Step two is you go ahead, once you've applied online, you go into LinkedIn and see if you can identify who the hiring manager is. Now, why not the recruiter? Well, in recruiters that are in high volume environments, a lot of them tend to be absolutely buried in candidates and getting calls all day from people saying how wonderful I am. The hiring manager is the one whose problem you're trying to solve. And if you can find the person who's the hiring manager for that job after you've applied, then your resume could show up like a Christmas gift. Christmas morning, here it is. The hiring manager who's used to taking 3 martini lunches is now reduced to going to McDonald's for a Big Mac because they don't have the time to get out for long lunches anymore. And, because they're doing the job of the people that they don't have on their team. So here they are, they're standing in line and they see, they're scrolling, waiting for their fries. And here it is. It's a note on LinkedIn from the candidate, who says, hi, I'd like to introduce myself. I have applied online. By the way, candidates should always say they've applied online because I've seen enough hiring managers and recruiters say, well, that's great, but we take everybody through the system. I've applied online. I have the skills you're looking for. Here's my resume. Love to talk to you. And, what that does is it shows a little bit of extra initiative. It shows that they're creative, that they can do research. And again, if you manage to reach, it's a crapshoot, but if you can reach the person whose problem you're solving, it could lead to a situation where the recruit manager walks over to the recruiter and says, hey, this person reached out to me. Can you screen them or call them in for an interview?
Marla, your thoughts as a hiring manager?
Oh, at that point, I'm already getting what the recruiters are giving me. But yes, I do have to agree. If they reach out to me directly, I'm always appreciative of that. I'm always interested. And he's right. If I get one, and I'm always saying, make sure you apply online, not opposed to talking to folks. But everything we have has to get routed to our system through the recruiters. So I like the folks that reach out. Doesn't hurt, but I will always ask that we have to have you go through the system as well. So,
Which is fair enough. Eric, what about you?
Yeah, I honestly, not having been a recruiter, I know of the ATS because I have recruiter friends who have shown it to me. They have just kind of walked me through it. I've never used it. But I understand how you can get lost in the weeds in there. Like you just make a couple mistakes, you just don't rank high enough, and you're just not qualified or not seen. And so my best way to get around it is always networking. I always see your online presence, the brand that you build, your resume as just your foundation. Like when people ask you, can you give me a resume? Or they start looking at your profile. Now you have your foundation. Now you can show them that you're qualified. You have your portfolio, you have your projects, all of that stuff. But it is that first aspect of like, let's get people interested, right? When you give your resume, you're trying to get them interested. But through that social networking, people can become interested in you much easier, especially if you have similar connections, or even when you take the leap of faith and reach out, right? And that's one thing I see with everyone I talk to. Everyone is terrified of talking to a stranger. Like they just don't want to reach out or don't want to make a comment or don't want to make a post. Just putting yourself out there seems to be so scary. And it is, like when I remember when I did it, terrified. Because I'm like, what are people going to think? My coworkers, my previous bosses, etc. But yet that's the very thing that gives you so much visibility. Gets people to click on your profile. And if you have the foundation, they'll take an interest. If they realize, hey, you're a thought leader in this, can you give me a resume? And opportunities begin to come to you. So that's my way of getting around the ATS.
And that's a good insight. And I will confess that at one of the places where I used to work, I wanted to work at this particular company, and I did eventually get hired on there. But before I even applied, I connected with a couple of project managers there, and I was shocked when I got hired, and I come around the corner one morning, and it's like, I recognize you. I connected with you on LinkedIn. I recognize you. I connected with you too. I mean, it's nice when it works out that way. Because even if you don't come out and say it, which I restrained myself and I didn't say that, but it was financials week when I met those particular project managers, and one of them shot me a look like, when you do something annoying and your mom just shoots you that look that says, I don't want to hear from you again. That's what these two project managers did. But so I was a little intimidated at first, but I got to know them over the course of time, and they both wound up being great people. And I was glad to work with them. So other thoughts on this? So we've talked a lot about the resume, but let's talk about the thing that tends to go with a resume, at least some of the time, and that is the cover letter. Scott, what do you have to say about cover letters?
They're a dying art. They're a dying art. In most cases, if you're applying through an ATS, don't bother unless they ask you for one, because they're not going to read it anyway. You see a lot of the management consulting companies ask for them, because they're hiring MBAs that are recently out of school. They want to see that they can write something. But in most cases, don't worry about it. And even if you do, most of the time it's going to come through email. Just this, no longer than something the face of your phone. Who am I? Why am I applying? What can I do for you? How to reach me? That's pretty much it. I give every client a cover letter when I work with them, but, they don't get used very often.
Yeah. Jacqueline, what say you?
Completely agree. They are on their way out. I have seen candidates use them as an opportunity to wow without being asked. I do not ask for a cover letter. They just put something beautiful together, and my team went, wow. And so it definitely helped move them along to the next stage, but I don't ask for it.
Marla, how about you as a hiring manager?
I have not seen a cover letter in years.
There you go. There you
Whether
go.
they come through the recruiters and they don't send them, but I'm assuming if they did send it, it would come with it, but I have not seen one in years.
Eric, are you going to surprise me and disagree with our consensus?
Somewhat. And
Really?
The reason I say somewhat is because you need to understand your audience. For example, I work a lot with new graduates, and a lot of new graduates are very ambitious, right? They go like, I want to go work with Google, Amazon, Netflix, all these big companies. These companies have thousands.
Wait, there are people that actually want to work at Netflix? You learn something new every day.
Yeah. And anyways, all of them, they get a lot of applications. You won't see a cover letter because there's just no time. The resume alone, you got 6 seconds, right? But there's a lot of startups. There's a lot of small companies that can get you where you want to be very quickly. They can give you experience. They can get you step up. And if it's your dream to be somewhere, sometimes you have to take that step to take the next one. So smaller companies, 50 employees or less. A lot of times these recruiters, hiring managers, are the ones doing the very hiring and recruiting, right? And so these people, especially startups, especially when it's very young, they want to make sure that they're not just hiring anybody. They want to make sure that they're hiring somebody that believes like they believe. And the cover letter can shine very well with that, right? You tell them about your passions, why you want to go here. And even if it's just a direction, you can say, I love this field. And that's why I think I'll be a great fit, right? And so it depends, on knowing your audience. And what I've seen is cover letters work in smaller companies. Anything above 100 people, I agree with everybody else. It just doesn't work. But it just depends where you're at, who you're targeting. So
you're not wrong, and I think there's a couple of addendums I'll say to that. First of all, if you have a name of somebody that you're supposed to send to, like someone says, hey, send a note to my cousin Louie. Well, you want to explain to Louie why you're sending the resume and who referred you to them. That makes sense. That sets up the whole conversation. The other one is, and a lot of people don't think about this, is career fairs. If you ever want to really wow a hiring manager or recruiter, bring a cover letter to a career fair. It'll show that you did your, address to that company. It'll show that you did your research before you went there. You'll have the name of the company on the cover letter. It explains who you are and what you are. And in a situation where managers get no more than a minute or two to talk to people, that blows them away.
As you mentioned job fairs, I'm remembering the last job fair I went to. So as I've described before, I'm a multimedia developer and video and 3D is my thing. And at this job fair, I decided to do something that I hoped no one else would do. So what I did was I bought an MP4 player, went to Home Depot, got two pairs of industrial magnets and some double-sided adhesive pads, loaded my demo reel onto this MP4 player, and had it stuck to my jacket while I'm walking around this career fair. And I will never forget, I'm at one of these booths, and a competitor, a competing company had a booth about 6-7 feet away, and the guy manning the competing booth walked over and he looked at the recruiter and he said, I don't want to mess up your conversation, but I had to see what this was about. And that career fair, I got so many phone calls and emails like, I put a star on your resume. Are you the guy that had that video badge thing? And I was like, yeah, that was me. And they're like, okay, I want to talk to you. So just a funny little anecdote, but that it just reminded me of that. Good times. So any other thoughts on cover letters? Going once, going twice. All right. So I think we've done a pretty good job of talking through what makes a good resume. But now let's talk about the hard part. Not the waiting, as Tom Petty would have you believe in that song of his. No, the hard part is actually seeking the job. So when I was learning how to be a job seeker, what I was taught to do was the following. Fill out an application, whether on paper or online, hand it to someone or click the submit button, and then fold my hands and wait for my phone to ring or for an email to come in. ... And that's all. And you can call me naive and ill-informed or just perhaps unmotivated, but that was the tack that I took in 2014. And as we recall that I was at it for 227 days with over 1,100 applications with 4 interviews, we may perhaps conclude that I was doing something wrong. So we talked a little bit about what job seekers should do. So let's talk about what job seekers in the present day should do. Eric, let's start with you.
Okay, so the first thing I see usually is a job seeker should start with figuring out what they actually want to do. Too many times they come in with the, I need anything. I'll take anything, right? And that's why they feel so stuck, because they have no direction. They have no destination. And that's the definition of being lost. If you have no idea where you're going, you're lost. And so they do the spray and pray, right? They'll apply 1,000 places and they'll try to network with as many people just to find a lead somewhere. And they're like, I'm not making any progress. Weeks are turning into months. And it's because they're not moving in any direction anywhere, right? And they're just stuck in place. So I would say first thing, figure out what you want to do and understand why you want to do it. You know, once you do that, everything starts to fall into place. You start to network with purpose. You start to, set up informational interviews. And that's honestly the thing I would tell anybody. You have your resume, you have your things, but an interview is an interview. And you can actually set informational interviews daily, multiple times a day. And instead of spending so much time sending applications, spend time learning from people who have done the things that you want to do. So that would be my advice on what to start doing if you're on the job hunt.
Yeah. Jacqueline, how about you?
I love that, Eric. Yes. And when individuals show up for those informational interviews, definitely, obviously being prepared with their questions. I think one of the best questions they can ask is, what are your challenges lately? And then have that information, but go back to the drawing board, quietly or silently put together your proposal or your solution to their challenge, and then close the loop by sharing it back to them, especially if that person is in a position where they can make hiring decisions or influence them. And beyond that, every job seeker, regardless if they're a job seeker yet or not, needs to have good hygiene, career hygiene. And everybody, I say or not, because it's honestly habits that I think need to happen regardless of if you are a job seeker or you're not a job seeker, because it's almost too late to start some of these when you become a job seeker. For example, networking. Everybody wishes they had started networking before they needed to network. And that's just good, career practice. So reaching out to the people or connecting with people that, and want to, be professional friends with or help each other out sometimes. That's just good hygiene. Having a great mindset, I think, is the most important thing. So honestly, I don't think living in fear around, oh my gosh, I'm going to get laid off is beneficial for anyone, but it can honestly happen to anyone and it's out of our control. So having almost a plan of action for if that day ever comes, what would I do? And know that no matter what, even though I can't rely on a job to help me feel stable and secure, I can rely on myself and my resourcefulness to figure anything out if that time were to ever come. And so making a little bit of plan and kind of having it in your back pocket for if that day ever comes, and just knowing that you're golden, you're solid. And then also just always branding. I don't know how else to put that, but you want to brand before you need to. And selling yourself online, it doesn't have to be this big grandiose thing. It can be as easy as, putting together a couple words about yourself and just reaching out to some people and sharing who you are. It doesn't have to be over the top.
Marla, how about you?
Oh, I don't have a whole lot with this question, so I'm not quite sure.
No worries. Plenty of time left. So something that we had touched on earlier that I think might merit revisiting is when you're actually in the interview. Like I described earlier, one of the things that sticks in my mind when I interview someone, if they connect with me, and by the same token, when I'm interviewing for a job, you may have noticed that I employ humor very easily. And that's kind of how I try to connect with people. And experience tells me, I've read it on post after post after post on LinkedIn. I've heard people say it. the best thing that you can do is connect with the person that you're speaking to. So that's absolutely, I've heard you guys say variants of that tonight so far, and I think that is a piece of advice that we can't plus one enough. So
I even try to do that when folks come in to interview. Like if usually there's a short walk or you're going somewhere to get settled, and just ask them a few questions or chat or whatever it may be, just to try to help them relax. And it's amazing, just the talking that quote small talk on the way in for a little bit, people will naturally relax a little bit.
mm-hmm.
But I think it's also important for people to understand boundaries too. There is a boundary between the employer and the job seeker, and it's a very fine line. I think part of this is, anybody who's been a hiring manager or recruiter, how many times have you had the candidate that reminds you of John Cusack from Say Anything, standing outside the window with the boombox, playing music, where you got the stalker candidate who's trying to make connections over and over again. It's just like, oh my God, you were fine the first conversation, but after the fourth time, we're done. We just can't do this. There's also, the other part of this too, which is humor. You mentioned, humor doesn't work for everybody. It's one of those things. You've got to be very careful about how you employ humor. If you say a joke that lands poorly, whether it's just because, something offensive that somebody might take offense to, or just quite simply your delivery is absolutely terrible, it's one of those things that not everybody can use humor to their advantage. But I have friends that can say the worst possible things and they'll be best friends with everybody afterwards. So, you've got to know yourself. But, that being said, the job search and careers have become much more transactional in a way. Companies have, as you see, employers have shortened the tenure that employers are being kept. Job seekers are moving jobs more frequently, which means that there's a lot more license to reach out to a total stranger via LinkedIn to ask for an informational conversation or to just present yourself for a job. It's just there, but no one to stop.
Yeah, and that's one. I love what Scott just said, to the point that I'm trying to say too many words at once. So what Scott just said is an important skill, not just for job seeking, but for anyone trying to survive in the professional world. And that is an ability to read the room, an ability to get a sense for the person or people that you're talking with and that you're sitting in a room with. And you're not going to be able to anticipate everything about them just 5 minutes after meeting them. Not even I'm
know
that
your
good.
audience, Brandon, right?
Yes, exactly. And it's easy for us because we're communicators, but for people in less people-centered lines of work, that can be a tough one to master. So the importance of that is something, like I said, that I don't think we can overstate. So Scott, very glad you said that. Marla, I'm glad you said it better than I did. So,
if I may add, sorry, Brandon.
It's all right. What you got, Eric?
Yeah, that's those boundaries and being able to read the room, that comes through experience. Nobody can just go out there and be like, I'm a master interviewer right after college. My first interview was so bad, I was literally sweating out of there. I was just like, that was horrible. Even if they offer me the job, I'm not going to take it because it was so bad. But that's why all these networking meetings, informational interviews are so important, because they give you all this practice. You learn how to small talk with the right crowd. You learn how to navigate this field, what language they're using, right? And it just becomes so natural that when you go in there, you can read the room, you can say the right things, you can, be able to realize, when is the interview taking a wrong turn? How can I get it back? And all of that stuff comes from practice. I tell my clients, people I help, the formal interview is opening night. That's not the rehearsal. The rehearsal happens in all the informational interviews, networking meetings, mock interviews. You practice that stuff out, and then you come in and you're ready. And if you're not, hey, you got it out of the way. Now let's make sure the next time is better. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, preparation is important too. Jacqueline, what do you think?
Again, Eric, with the fire, we were all practicing being a great communicator at one point. And some people, it takes more practice than others, but communication is absolutely a skill that can be mastered. no matter how introverted or extroverted or anything that we are. And so no matter what our job is, and some people, their job is to interview because they're trying to look for a new, better, or a source of income. It's their job to get better at it, no matter what it is. And I honestly live by this, especially when it comes to interviewing and hiring, is that the way we approach it is more important than what we do to approach it. And so I approach every single interview as an opportunity to connect. I make connection the highest priority. And as the interviewer, it's different, right, than if I'm the job seeker, but I've interviewed as the job seeker, and that was my highest priority. And I haven't gotten every job I've interviewed for by any means, but it certainly helped things. And so learning that is possible for anyone, I truly believe.
I'd like to dovetail behind what Jacqueline just said by saying that you mentioned the I word, introvert. I will tell you, and Marla, you can back me up on this, I am about the most introverted person you will ever meet. No joke. And I will tell you on air that I was terrified about tonight. The reason is I'm doing what this podcast set out to do, which is gather people of different backgrounds and of different experience and start a conversation. But at the same time, the thought of talking to strangers is terrifying. So, over the years, I've learned how to kind of compensate for that a little bit, but it's still before everybody logged in, the whole time I'm thinking, how could this go wrong? And then one of the things that I've always said to myself is, well, you dwell on what could go wrong, but think about what could go right. And, it's still, even with people that I know, I've done a number of episodes with people that I call friends, and even with them, right before the cameras roll, there's always that twinge of nervousness. So it stays with you. And there's nothing wrong, I think, with acknowledging that you have those limitations. Like I say, I'm an introvert. And the last time I interviewed for a job, they asked me, what is your biggest weakness? And I said up front, I'm an introvert. Here's how that manifests. I don't speak up in meetings. I like to think about things before I talk. And that does mean that by the time I'm ready to come forward with something, it's reasonably reasoned, if you'll pardon the expression. But that also means that I'm not prone to ready, fire, aim. I do like to think things through and have a reasoned and thoughtful approach to things by the time I'm ready to propose something. So I think that kind of goes to what everyone said earlier, too, about your perspective on things. So that's my pointless anecdote for this half hour anyway.
But it's not pointless, actually, because the what's your biggest weakness is one of the most common questions that employers ask. And it's one of the dumbest, too, because, it's a trap, Well, I sometimes get so busy I forget to bathe. Well, what, are you really going to say something like that? No, I mean, I don't get along well with other people. Well, congratulations, you knocked yourself out. What they're looking for with a question like that, by the way, is, and you answered this correctly, they're looking for the self-awareness, which helps build the connection, but also demonstrate that you've been able to grasp it and to work around it and not make it a problem. So
I always ask them too. I do ask that question, but I also say we all have weaknesses. What is yours, and what do you do to help overcome those weaknesses or improve?
And you're setting it up far nicer than a lot of employers are.
I mean, that's the very thing. I always ask them, of course, your strengths and weaknesses, and the big one for the weakness and the strength is, self-awareness. But then I also want to know, okay, well, you're aware of that, but are you doing anything about that? Like, okay, if your weakness is public speaking, okay, well, are you practicing that, or what do you do to improve on that? So everyone's going to have one, but what are you doing about that weakness? And that's what I want to know. Like, what action? I want to hear that action from that.
Jacqueline, what do you think?
I think that even though I'm very extroverted, I also get nervous before interviews. And so again, it's a skill to be learned and something that you just build and become better at with practice, with intentional practice. When I ask questions especially in the screening interview, it's a shorter interview, sometimes more high level. Again, my highest priority is connection. usually the best conversations come when they feel safe in the conversation. They can trust you. They feel connected. They feel like you actually care. And I do actually care. So that comes through. But I'm always, I think some of the more difficult questions are, why are you looking for a job? Why are you leaving your job? Or why did you leave? And those questions about transition can be sensitive. So it's kind of another weakness conversation. And I'm not trying to have an I gotcha moment at all. I'm really asking, tell me your story. Are we giving you what you're seeking? And sometimes yes, sometimes no. So sometimes I'll have to rephrase it a couple different ways. But the what's your greatest weakness conversation, actually, we ask that differently. And one of the questions we ask is, what are the 3 biggest personal development or leadership lessons you've learned in the last year? And then they will, be able to share what the self-reflections that I think we are aiming for. Because honestly, I'm thinking about my biggest weaknesses right now. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I don't even know. It's such a hard question to answer. There's so many different contexts for it.
And I think for anyone who's watching, I think we've just heard something that's very, very important to keep in mind when you're going through the job seeking process. And that is, we've said it a couple of times already tonight, but I want to reiterate it, which is everyone that you meet along the way is a person. They're human. And if you reach out to a recruiter, say, you're reaching out to someone who's been through this before, who probably understands how you're feeling. And if you approach them in a reasonable way, I think it's fair to say that you will more than likely get a reasonable response. Jacqueline, what do you think?
I'd certainly hope so. Yes, we are human. Some in the workforce don't act very human, unfortunately. And if you come across that, and that's a high value of yours, I would suggest that maybe it's not a great match for you. And that's one way to filter them out. But yeah, if you are strong in your purpose and your sense of purpose, you have good career seeker hygiene, and you're pulling out all the stops, with the best intention, then I think you'll have a pretty good chance of connecting with an actual human.
And that's reasonable and logical. So on the subject of filtering out, I touched on this briefly earlier on, but now I want to talk about it in full. And that is, we talk a lot about using sites like LinkedIn for the purposes of networking. There are 2 questions on this topic that I've got. The first of which is, what would you say to people regarding what they post publicly? Like, what are you looking for, and what might constitute a red flag on your part? So, Jacqueline, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, that's great. There's something, top of mind. I think the tone of anything you put online needs to be just looked at. It's just like, the tone of how you communicate with someone. In this case, you're communicating to hundreds, sometimes thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. And so when you think about your intention, I think that's the biggest thing. And when somebody has an intention of, saying like, woe is me, or bringing, some kind of victim language, or blaming a former employer, speaking badly about anybody at all, doesn't matter who they are, unless the point is to teach in a respectable way. I think that's just a character issue and possibly an integrity issue. And so I would take another look at intention before posting absolutely anything. And if intention is questioned by someone else, then, putting your ego guard down enough to take another look at it and really reevaluate why you posted it.
That's a really good insight. Marla, how about you?
Yep, you have to really look at the intent. And I think Jacqueline's right too. You look for that respectful post. Everybody has difference of opinions. That's okay. But how are you approaching those difference of opinions? And you just really have to look at that. I mean, if you have people always jumping on you, I've been on other social networking things, and some people can be very crazy, and you're like, whoa. So especially even more so on LinkedIn when you are trying to connect for professional reasons. I mean, you could look at other ones and be like, okay, well, if you go over to another network and you think they're posting one way here, but now they're posting some way other here, you might be like, well, you have to look at it from that angle as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are
Scott
they
or Eric?
consistent across the board when they're communicating?
Yeah, absolutely. Scott or Eric?
Yeah, I'll go next. So with LinkedIn, I would say the first thing is just start getting into a habit of going out and posting. I see that as probably the biggest hurdle for people, especially when they were in a job and now they're transitioning to the job search. They have no brand, they have no presence, and it's scary for them. Like it's the very mentality of like, what are people going to think about me, right? And I see it as that becoming such a hurdle that it stops you from being you. And you have to be respectful. You have to have the right intent. And it's also about the content that you put out there, but how you respond to those who engage with you. In my posts, I tend to make conversations with everybody who makes a comment. And I've been told that that's something that people notice. And even when they disagree with me, that's perfectly fine. Like, for example, I love working from home. And somebody tells me working from home is not the right thing for me, right? And I'm like, exactly. You know yourself, right? If you know you work best there, by all means do it, right? And then I'll ask them, can you tell me why you like to work on site so much? And they tell me, right? And so whether they disagree with you or agree with you, the idea is you're not taking a defensive stance. You're not just like saying you're wrong, I'm right, because at that point, it's the mood that changes, right? The experience that you're giving your audience, the people that see you, and then your brand starts to go down. But when you come in with that open-mindedness of being like, I'm respectful, like, I'm willing to see from other person's perspective, that's where you start to gain these true followers. People who, even though they disagree with you, they're willing to come back and say, these are my 2 cents. Here I agree with you. Here I don't. And that doesn't mean we can't be friends. And just, I think having that respect is huge.
It is. And as much as I swore that I would never use this phrase, it's realistically, in the present day, it really is about creating a safe space to disagree. I mean, realistically. So,
yeah. And Jacqueline, I'm going to borrow your phrase, hygiene. I think that's a great phrase for LinkedIn. You've got to really practice good hygiene on what you do on there. This isn't Facebook. Look, I know a lot of people that have different points of view politically, socially, and that's fine. You know what? That's okay. Some of them are good friends of mine. Some of them aren't. But, the thing is that LinkedIn is not the platform for that. That is not the place to really get into that. You've got to basically think about the fact that you don't have control over which employer is going to have an interest in you, how people are going to judge you. You lose your control over something as soon as you post it. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see is a lot of people adopting the smash mouth way of talking from politics these days. Posting on, I don't care if you like Trump, like Biden, hate Biden. That's really not the platform to do this. And it's not the platform to insult other people. Don't do that. If you want to do that, start your Facebook group, go have your fun over there. And even then, I would encourage you not to do that. But it's one of those things that, because employers do check, they look, they sometimes take a look. I think honestly, this is one of those situations where keep it business focused. Don't say anything on the comment thread unless you've got something to say, meaning, hey, I'm looking for a job. Hey, congratulations on getting that new opportunity. Hey, here's this really cool article about this. In most cases, it's just gonna get you blown out of the water. I mean, it's just, there's really all downside and no upside to it. Unless you're a political figure. That's a different story. Guess what? Then you can do it. Or you're Elon Musk and you can get away with saying anything.
So I'm going to translate what Scott just said into kind of what it means to me, which is if you wouldn't say it in the workplace that you're attempting to join, don't put it out there on what is essentially a professional social networking site, because the net effect is exactly the same. And I've watched in places where I worked, people would get along, atmosphere would be nice and quiet and cohesive, and then someone would come out with a statement of something horribly controversial, like saying pepperoni is the best pizza topping ever. It is, by the way. But all of a sudden, you have a raucous disagreement because you have people who advocate for sausage or for bacon. I can kind of sympathize with the bacon people because, bacon. But, time and place. Scott is exactly right. Time and place.
Yeah, you don't want to say it in the workplace either, quite frankly. I've seen people get terminated for it.
Yes, absolutely. So something else that we kind of touched on earlier that I want to revisit is we talked about how to address employment gaps in written form, but let's talk about good and bad answers during interviews. And Marla, why don't you start us off on this one?
Well, I do remember that Eric did touch on this a little bit. A lot of it is kind of the mood that you bring to the table. Like, are you talking about it in a positive way or a negative way? I mean, if you're overly depressed that you've been laid off or you haven't, been out of the workforce and you steer it that way. I was out early on when my children were small for the first year. That was easy to talk to. So, and obviously I kind of looked at it as, hey, that was a good lesson in time management for me because I hear all of a sudden I have a lot of things going on and a small one at home. And so it's really that spin. Again, I want to hear their story. And if they bring a good story to me and it makes sense and they could translate it to the work area, I'm all about. Now, if you don't say a whole lot and then you cut it short, you kind of already lost me. You're like, oh, I got laid off. Okay, and yeah, nothing else. Like, I have actually had interviews where you feel like I'm probing people for more information, and then you're like, okay, well, I kind of give them the benefit of the doubt early on because they might be nervous. Get it? If you try to probe, but I'm still not getting anything. I'm like, okay, well.
Jacqueline, what about you?
Oh, that is such a great point. Yes, my favorite interviews happen when, and I'm not saying this is a requirement, but I appreciate it when candidates kind of interview themselves. I mean, I understand when somebody's had some great interview practice, or maybe they were a recruiter in another life, but they understand how to tell a story. And so they answer the question. It's pretty brief, comprehensive, and they ask questions when they're confused, but they bring a great energy to it. And it is something that doesn't drag on forever. And it also, gives enough to bite on and probably sparks more interest. And so there's definitely an art to it.
Yeah, like a two-way conversation almost.
Yeah, there's an art to it. And, I get a lot of feedback on interviews, and a lot of people say it's like having a conversation together when I didn't even feel like I was in an interview. Like, that's, I think, how it's supposed to be. I don't think it's supposed to be this big, scary thing.
And that's the way that I've always tried to tell people to approach things. Don't look at it as, I think the mental impression some people have about job interviews is that instead of sitting in a comfortably lit room, maybe with the air conditioning going and maybe with, a touch of air freshener in the air, they see it as they're in a hard metal chair with a hard metal table with someone who's holding a very bright light above them, interrogating them like a scene out of the movie. Or seen out of a movie. And I've always told people, look at it more as just a conversation. Don't treat it as if it's informal, because that's a big mistake I've seen a lot of people make. But do treat it as if you're sitting across from another person, another human being, someone who has needs and who, for all you know, has every reason to want to hire you. You just have to give them the information that they need to reach that conclusion that you're the one that they want. And the only way that you can get the information about what they need is by talking to them. They'll say it. They'll ask you. So that's how I've learned to approach interviews anyway. So what do you guys say?
Yeah, you want to make sure that, first of all, you're feeding them what they want to hear. I don't mean I don't mean pandering, but I do mean making sure that, for example, the elevator pitch, the 2 minutes about who you are, should clearly answer the question, why should I hire you? That's what you're trying to set the stage up. If you're setting up a situation where, there's a negative, like you got laid off or you have a gap of employment, follow the Oreo method. Something good on the outside, start the story positive, embed the negative so it's not really that prominent, and then end with a positive. Same thing with Get familiar with behavioral interviews. Tell me about a time when you had a situation like this. Don't tell stories about when you blew up the company. Tell stories where you were able to learn something or solve something or fix something or make it better. But yeah, and most of all, just realize it's a person across the table. They're probably thinking just the same thing. Well, crap, I got pulled out of a very busy day to sit down with a candidate. Is this really going to be worthwhile? Make it worthwhile. And the last thing I would say is that, just like anything else, interviewing is a learned skill. It's like learning to play the piano. And it's unfortunate because we don't spend time in school learning how to do an interview. But it is what it is. The people that prepare for it are the ones that are going to typically do better. And, that's just it. So take the time, learn how to have a conversation with somebody, learn how to answer things pointedly and in a way that's going to help demonstrate your benefits.
Absolutely. Other comments? Eric, what you got?
Yeah. So with interviews, there's two questions that are being answered, right? And sometimes interviewers don't even know these are the questions that they're looking for. And that is, how well can you get the job done? And how well can we work together? A lot of people focus so much on the job done, right? Like, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this. But just like Marla gave the example, they give you this one word answer and you're like, I can't communicate with this. How are we going to work together? And you killed it. You just lost the interview because you can't talk to somebody. And so, yeah, I think those are excellent points, with the mood, the energy. People want to make sure that they can work with you because, especially your hiring manager, I heard people say that hiring managers are terrified of making the bad hire. And the more people I talk to, the more I see it. I'm like, yeah, you're married to this person basically. They can choose to leave because if you say this is not working, then as a hiring manager, it just doesn't look very good. I've been in that position, and honestly, it's tough because it's you have to make it work. You never want to give up on somebody, and it is just it's scary, especially if you're in those shoes and you're just trying to figure out who's the best fit.
Absolutely. And the importance of good interview skills is another one of those things that we can't overstate. So here comes another anecdote from my history, but all the way back in 2008 when I joined the workforce, here I was, a young kid jumping into this massive working world with people who, for all I knew, were applying for the same job with years more experience than I had. And I was terrified, but I went through the process anyway. I was very transparent with the people that I interviewed with, and I told them, I'm just starting out, I'm trying to find my way, but I need some experience. And that resonated with the first person that hired me, because when he called me to offer me the job, he said, I recognize that you don't have experience, but the only way to get experience is by getting experience. So you're fresh out of college, hopefully you have a malleable mind so you can learn. So I want you, come work for me. And I've never forgotten that. And I've always tried to keep that in the back of my mind when I'm interviewing people. It's, as I said before, it's more about, with me, it's about connection. And if I think that someone, let me back up. So I can teach technical skills. What I really need is someone that, yes, has a basic understanding of the fundamentals of the job. I mean, that's a basic requirement for any job, I think. But what I'm most interested in is someone who can learn when they need to, who is able to find solutions on their own, certainly, but who is also willing to be mentored. And I'm like that because those were the things that helped me succeed in my very first job. And to be clear, that have helped me succeed in every job since then. I always come in confidently, like I know that I can do what you need me to do as long as you're willing to answer questions and help me figure things out. And I've never had anyone say to me, that is an unreasonable expectation. I don't want you. So, I mean, what do you guys have to say about that?
I have to agree. It's all about expectations. I mean, long as you know what you're hiring, you want to be able to work with the people. I think, like you said, you have to have the basic skills or at least show that you're teachable. But those soft skills are very important. And you're going to know early on in the interview, that's really what you want to know. Obviously, you're going to go down your list. There's certain things you need them to know. But if you know they're teachable and they have the right personality, the soft skills that you need, they're the good candidate.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
With
Go ahead.
with me helping people that come out of college, right? And I think that's the biggest trait that they can show, like the ability to communicate well and the ability to just learn. Talking to them and other hiring managers, it's when they look at internships or entry level roles, like the question is, I just want to make sure you're not going to be a burden. That means I'll teach you how to do it, and then you start to figure out a way to do it, right? Can you learn on your own? Can you ask questions when you need help? Can you not be a burden, right? And that's just ultimately your ability to learn, your ability to communicate are so huge, especially when you're starting out in your career.
And Eric, you just touched on something that I think we should spend a few minutes on, and that is the subject of asking for help. In my history, I've met people who would sooner eat stewed beets for a year, and just like that, you know what my feelings are about stewed beets, then they would rather do that than ask for help. Because in their minds, the second they admit that there's something they don't know, they fail. And I have always taken sort of a different approach, which is I have no problem asking for help when I need it. But when I do ask for help, I try to say, I'm not sure what we should do here. This is what I think. What do you think? So that way you're not asking someone to generate an idea, say. You're sharing your ideas and asking them to collaborate with you to either say, yes, this is a good approach, no, this isn't a good approach, or maybe that would work, but maybe do this, this, and this. I mean, what do you guys think?
I'm not opposed to people asking for help. I think it's great, but you don't always want people to ask the same things over and over and over. If you're going to ask and learn, I'm in a profession, it was in SATCOM and networking. I knew nothing about SATCOM and networking when I came in, so I asked a lot of questions and I had to learn very quickly to do that skill. But that's what you want to look for people. Again, you could research, like you said, bring things to the table. Hey, I think is this correct? This is what I've researched. Does this make sense? Or if not, then please tell me I'm wrong, or explain something to me. And then I always want to make sure I understand what they're telling me so I don't go back tomorrow and ask the same question again.
Yeah, absolutely. Other thoughts? Jacqueline, what do you think?
Yeah, I think excellence demands making sure that you're clear on your role, that you know what you're doing, that you are being resourceful in training for that role and taking an active part in it versus passively sitting back and waiting for someone to tell you what to do or figuring out your problems or anything along those lines. And so in order to learn and grow and be excellent, which is a high value of mine and ours at our company, you have to be on it. That doesn't mean perfect. It also means asking questions and being open to admitting when you don't know and just being curious enough to find the answer no matter what. The answer is always there.
Absolutely. Scott or Eric?
Yeah, I was going to say, because I do career coaching, I help people find that balance where they actually enjoy their careers. And when you don't ask for help, being somebody who has done that for years, you are putting unnecessary burden on yourself and your team. And it helps nobody. Like, you are frustrated, you're stressed, you're taking work home, and you don't have to. Like, you can just reach out to a team member, reach out to your manager and say, hey, I need help. There's just too much work. Or I don't know, I don't have a clear vision of what the end result should look like. And that saves you so much time, right? You no longer have to take work home. You don't have to impact your family, your mental health. Just the ability to ask for help is so huge. And yet I think for me, I don't know about anybody else, it stems from your early days of childhood, right? Like, you ask for help, no, or you may get fun of, or whatever it is. And all of a sudden asking for help becomes a negative experience and you're scared. And that stays with you until you are able to take that leap. And translating that to the job search a little bit, I think that's exactly why people are so scared to network and ask for help from other individuals, even though there are plenty of people so willing to help. We're afraid of rejection, of getting made fun of, or getting the classic, what, you don't know how to do that, right? And it's just it's this idea that we have created in our minds that just it doesn't hold up anymore, right? We just have to get out, be a little brave, ask for help, and the world just opens up to you.
Absolutely. Scott, your thoughts?
No, I agree with everything everyone said.
Nice. So here's probably the biggest question that anyone would probably have in 2022, the era of high-tech everything. And that is do's and don'ts of networking on LinkedIn. We talked about one don't earlier, which is don't send the same connection request 100 times and whatnot. But Jacqueline, I think we should probably start with you on this one. But when people are looking to network on LinkedIn, I know that term means different things to different people. What is a good approach to networking?
Well, there are many, and so it really depends on you as a person, what your approach is. Definitely not the typical sales approach that a lot of individuals are seeing right now, which is unfortunate, but especially in the last 2 years, we've seen an increase in people, asking for a connection and then immediately trying to pitch you something or sell you something. And I would do anything except that. But, being an actual human, doing some research on the person that you're reaching out to, having a purpose with your connection request or in-mail message, and being, very purposeful and maybe innovative. And if you even go above and beyond enough to send them an article they think they might like for their industry, or, teach them something, you'll definitely stand out. And just don't ask for 5 minutes of their time if you have, nothing to offer them, but also keeping in mind that you probably have something to offer them. So just being respectful above everything else. And
what Jacqueline just described is something that we deal with in the communication industry a lot, which is, what is the so what? Like, what's in it? The thing that we always, when we're writing like an article, say, the thing that you always have to ask yourself is, the audience is what's in it for me. In other words, if you're writing an article about how much you love classic Camaros, that can be great. And full disclosure, I have a classic Camaro that I absolutely adore. I've even given her a name, but that's great for me. But to an audience of millions on LinkedIn, that may hold zero relevance unless you can give them a connection. So I love what Jacqueline just said. I apologize if I stole anybody's thunder, but I never miss an opportunity to plug the fact that I have a classic Camaro named Rami. So there you go. Marla, how about you?
Oh, this is probably not my specialty at all. I probably should be on there more, but no, I do go out there and I comment. I look at a lot of different people's. I try to interact. I don't probably do it enough. I need to take some of Eric's advice to do a little more networking. I naturally am an introvert, but I would like to say I'm an extroverted introvert. Once I'm comfortable or I get to know folks, I'm in a much better environment. So I do push myself. I do try to comment on folks to collaborate back and forth. One of the reasons I'm here. But yeah, I have to agree with Jacqueline because it's definitely not my thing. So I'm taking some of that advice myself.
That's cool. Scott or Eric, what have you guys got?
The networking is hard. It's really, really hard. And you've got to be strategic, especially these days when it's like drinking from the fire hose with so many potential contacts. I mean, I think it's always important to be involved in some sort of industry group. For project managers, the PMI is great. A lot of local chapters, great way to be plugged into that community. You've got, a lot of those types of organizations. But I think the other part of this is, rather than, worrying about reaching out to and nurturing every contact you've got on LinkedIn, start with the people you really know. Make sure that you tend to and nurture your contacts. You treat people with dignity and respect. If somebody needs a favor from you, don't be selfish. Help them. And, maybe they'll be able to return the favor in the future. But, give of yourself. That's, the best thing you can do is cultivate a positive reputation and, and relationship by making sure that you're treating your network the best you can do.
Absolutely. Eric, how about you?
I could talk for days about networking. It's my bread and butter. But and I love what Scott said. It's about giving. And when I talk to job seekers, a lot of times they'll tell me, I tried to network, I tried to send messages, and I get nothing. And a lot of times I'll be like, all right, read me what you sent to them. And you'll be amazed as to how much me's, my's, mine, it's all about the person, right? Like nothing about the person that I'm reaching out to. It's all about like what you can do for me and what I want from you and that stuff. But I'm thinking it's about giving. Like networking is about giving completely. The way I reach out and find new connections in fields I want to tap into, I will start with a simple Boolean search to find out who is actually posting about those fields, who has an audience that interacts with them. I will go into the comments and read them. And if there's something I genuinely want to say, add value to, I will do that. After a couple comments, after a couple discussions, I will reach out with a very personalized note to the individual, expressing gratitude. That's it. I'm not asking them for anything. I'm just saying something like, hey, Caitlin, I really appreciate you bringing that topic. It made me think about X, Y, Z. I will look forward to more of your content and I hope we can connect. And that's it. They connect. Most of the time they'll say a little thank you or whatever it is. And we begin a conversation. I'm genuinely interested. And I would probe as to what led you to post that, and we start a conversation because they posted it and it's out there for everybody. And again, small connections, we start talking. And before we know, we are like, people don't do this. LinkedIn has the ability to send voice messages. It's like years ahead, right? You all of a sudden have phone calls almost. And once you have that going, it's extremely easy to ask for a video call. Once you have a video call, you have a face to put in there, you remember the individual. And at the end, it's about what you can give. How you can support them in their posting, in whatever they're doing. A lot of people have podcasts, blogs nowadays. You go out, refer your friends to it, you help them and support them. And when you ask a question, you're not asking them for a job. You just ask them like, can you tell me more about this field? And that's it. And they will say, oh, I don't know, but maybe you can look at this company. And that's a gift. They just gave you their opinion. And the moment they give you their opinion and you actually act on it, as in you go out and you spend an hour researching that company, come back a couple of days later and tell them, I want to thank you for your time. I looked at the company you mentioned, and this is what I learned. You give them a list and you tell them, do you know anybody who can tell me more? All of a sudden your network began to grow. And it doesn't take that long, right? It's strategic because you have to find the right people, but it can be so natural. Whereas people are so focused on the me, not so much on the giving.
Absolutely. And wise words they are. Well, we're almost out of time, but to wrap up, if you could each share one tidbit of wisdom or experience from your respective areas of responsibility, your AORs, as we say, what would it be? I nominate Scott to go first.
Can you clarify the question for me?
So, we all see, just by virtue of what we do, we all see variations of the same scenario day in and day out. So like Scott, you see resumes day in and day out. Marla, you interview people day in and day out. Jacqueline, you engage with people for purposes of recruiting all the time. And Eric, you see what people do right and do wrong for purposes of job seeking. So if there was one piece of advice or pearl of wisdom that you would want people to know before they come to you or before they come into your area of responsibility, what would it be? Think of it like if you had an FAQ, a frequently asked question, what would FAQ number 1 be?
Try harder. What can I do to get noticed? Everyone seems to ignore me. The answer is try harder. Don't worry about, yes, go ahead, apply for the jobs, but, don't let yourself be stuck with fear. Reach out to that hiring manager, reach out to the company, find someone, network, try harder. The people that sit home and posting and praying for a job, they end up with situations where they get 5 contacts out of 2,000 submittals.
Yeah. Jacqueline, how about you?
That made me laugh, Scott. I agree and would say that really leading yourself through the job seeking process is of utmost importance. And actually being the person who has that amazing, career or job seeker hygiene versus just being, performative about it or just going through the motions, doing the things, but actually being the person who shows up with enthusiasm and it's authentic, will take you very far.
Absolutely. Eric?
All right. First off, I love Jacqueline's comment on authenticity and enthusiasm. I think the moment you have those is the moment you're golden. Like everything just begins to naturally flow to you. I would personally say my piece of advice is figure out what you want and understand why you want it. A lot of people don't see that, so they kind of jump into any career. When they do jump into a career, I would say break down your steps. That's my piece of advice to job seekers. Everybody's so focused with, I need a job, right? But before you get the job, you need the interview. So make sure you get a ton of interviews. Start setting up all these informational interviews, start finding ways to get noticed, and just keep on breaking it down, right? If you have this huge milestone, what can you do that will actually let you? What do you have to get before you get to where you want to be? So always break it down. Don't be stuck by looking at something that seems insurmountable or something that just keeps you in a single place. If you're not getting interviews, break it down, figure out why, and then work on it.
Absolutely. Marla, last comment of the night is yours.
Communicate and be genuine. I think everybody else touched on all the rest.
But that's a nice summation, and it's another one of those things that we can't overstate. Well, thank you for that, and thank you to all of you guys for coming on here and sharing your experience with us tonight. I could not be happier with the wisdom and insights that we've gotten tonight, and I, for one, can't wait for this episode to go live.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
Thanks,
Sir.
Brandon.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Yes, ma'am. So for more from our experts, connect with them on LinkedIn and tell them B Squared sent you so they have a reason to, be glad that they put up with my nonsense all night. But for now, that's all we've got for you. Until next time, this is Brandon Bridges reminding you the best way to be is B Squared. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Well, I do my best to understand it, but you still mystified, and I wanna know why. Cruel to be kind in the right measure. Cruel to be kind, that's a very good sign. Gotta be cruel to be kind. You gotta be cruel to be kind in the right measure. Cruel to be kind, it's a very good sign. Gotta be cruel to be kind.
I'll share a thought here. You can't beat the system.